The smallest voice in the room is sometimes the one that changes everything. Monday mornings inside Brooks Global headquarters always began with precision. The executive boardroom overlooked the Boston skyline through towering glass windows as sunlight reflected across polished conference tables, digital presentation screens, and neatly organized reports waiting for review. Nathan Brooks, a 46-year-old white millionaire CEO known for making difficult decisions with calm confidence, stood at the head of the room discussing the company's newest expansion strategy. Around him sat senior executives, financial advisors, department directors, and legal consultants, each focused on charts filled with forecasts, budgets, and ambitious goals for the coming year. Every minute of the meeting had been carefully planned, and every person understood the importance of staying on schedule. Nathan had built his reputation by respecting both people and time, rarely allowing unexpected interruptions to influence critical business decisions. Halfway through a presentation, his private phone resting quietly beside his notebook began to ring. The room immediately fell silent. Almost no one possessed that number. Nathan glanced briefly at the unfamiliar caller identification before instinctively reaching to silence it. Just as his finger touched the screen, something persuaded him to answer instead. He lifted the phone calmly to his ear. Nathan Brooks speaking. For a brief second, there was only nervous breathing on the other end of the line. Then came the gentle voice of a little girl. "Please do not hang up, sir. I practiced this all night." Every executive around the table stopped moving. Nathan slowly lowered the presentation remote onto the table. The quiet innocence in her voice carried none of the urgency of a sales call or the confidence of a business negotiation. It carried only hope mixed with fear. Nathan stepped away from the conference table and walked toward the large windows overlooking the city. "I am listening," he replied softly. The little girl released a small breath, as though she had been afraid the conversation would end before it even began. "My name is Emma Parker. I am 8 years old." Nathan smiled gently despite himself. "Hello, Emma." There was another short pause before she continued. He could hear the faint rustling of paper. "I wrote everything down because I did not want to forget." Nathan imagined a child carefully holding a handwritten page with trembling hands. "You are doing very well," he encouraged. Emma continued reading slowly. "My mom does not know I am calling you. She would never ask anyone for help because she says people are busy." Nathan leaned quietly against the window. Beyond the glass, Boston bustled with thousands of people beginning another workday, yet the only voice he truly heard belonged to one little girl he had never met. "Why did you want to speak with me?" he asked gently. Emma answered without hesitation. "Because everyone told my mom there was nothing anyone could do, but I thought maybe the person who owns the company should know she still believes it is a good place." Nathan's expression slowly changed. Around the conference table, several executives exchanged curious glances, unable to hear Emma's words but recognizing the unusual seriousness settling across their CEO's face. Emma carefully unfolded another section of her handwritten page. "My mom used to work for your company. She misses her job every day, but she misses smiling even more." Nathan remained completely silent. The board meeting, the financial reports, and the carefully planned agenda quietly disappeared from his thoughts. All that remained was the gentle determination of a child who had spent an entire night practicing a phone call, hoping that if she found the right words, someone powerful enough to help would choose to listen. Emma Parker held the small sheet of notebook paper so tightly that its edges had begun to curl beneath her fingers. On the other end of the phone, Nathan Brooks remained completely silent, giving her all the time she needed. His silence was not impatience. It was permission. Emma looked down at the carefully written sentences she had erased and rewritten so many times the night before. A few words were crossed out with pencil marks, while others had been rewritten more neatly beside them. She took a slow breath exactly as her mother had taught her before speaking in front of her elementary school class. "I hope I am not bothering you, sir," she said softly. I know you have very important work. Nathan glanced through the glass wall toward the boardroom where the executives waited quietly for his return. For the first time in years, the quarterly reports on the conference table no longer seemed like the most important thing waiting for his attention. You are not bothering me, Emma, he replied warmly. Please tell me what you wanted me to know. Emma looked at the final page in her small stack of handwritten notes. My mom worked for Brooks Global for almost 9 years. She always said everyone there worked very hard because they wanted to help people, not just build a company. Nathan listened carefully. Something about the way the little girl described the business sounded familiar, almost like hearing someone repeat values he himself had once spoken to new employees years earlier. What is your mother's name? He asked gently. Sarah Parker, Emma answered immediately. Nathan quietly repeated the name to himself. He could not remember every employee in a company with thousands of people, but he made a mental note never to forget it again. Emma continued reading from her paper. Last year she lost her job when her department changed. She told me it was nobody's fault and that sometimes businesses have to make difficult decisions. Nathan lowered his eyes. He remembered approving several restructuring plans during the previous year after reviewing financial recommendations prepared by senior leadership. Each report had contained numbers, departments, and projected savings. None had contained the voices of children waiting at home. Emma hesitated before reading the next sentence. She smiles for me every morning before school because she does not want me to worry. Her voice became almost a whisper. But after she thinks I cannot see her anymore, she stops smiling. Nathan closed his eyes for a brief moment. Around the boardroom table, several executives quietly watched him through the glass walls, unable to hear the conversation but sensing that something deeply personal was unfolding. Emma carefully turned over the page. I am not asking you to give my mom anything she did not earn. Nathan felt an unexpected respect growing with every word the little girl spoke. She always tells me that people should work for opportunities. Emma paused again before reading the final sentence she had practiced more than any other. I only wanted to ask if she could have one more chance to show how hard she works because I think she forgot how wonderful she is after losing her job. Nathan looked across the Boston skyline shining beneath the bright morning sun. Thousands of people filled the streets below, each carrying invisible stories that rarely appeared inside boardroom presentations. He realized that one carefully prepared phone call from an 8-year-old girl had already accomplished something extraordinary. It had reminded him that every employment decision made inside his company eventually reached a kitchen table, a family photograph, a school backpack, and a child quietly practicing hopeful words on a sheet of notebook paper late into the night. The quiet that followed Emma Parker's final sentence seemed to stretch far beyond the length of a simple phone call. Nathan Brooks remained standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking across the Boston skyline while gently turning the little girl's words over in his mind. Around the conference table, the executives waited respectfully, their presentation screens still glowing with financial forecasts that no longer held his attention. Nathan finally spoke, his voice calm and reassuring. Emma, thank you for trusting me enough to call. On the other end of the line, Emma released a small breath she had been holding for what felt like forever. I was afraid I would forget something, she admitted softly. Nathan smiled. You remembered the most important thing. You spoke honestly. Emma looked down at the wrinkled sheet of notebook paper resting on the kitchen table. Several penciled sentences had been crossed out before she found the courage to write the words she truly wanted to say. My mom does not know I called, she whispered again. Please do not let her think she did something wrong. Nathan's expression grew thoughtful. I promise I will not embarrass her. Emma hesitated before asking one final question. Do you think people can forget how good they are? Nathan remained silent for a moment. It was a question no executive report had ever asked him. Sometimes, he answered honestly. Life can become so difficult that people stop seeing themselves the way others do. Emma quietly nodded, even though he could not see her. That is what happened to my mom. Nathan glanced toward the conference room once more before making a decision. Emma, would it be all right if I met both of you this afternoon? There was complete silence on the line. For a brief second, Nathan wondered if the call had disconnected. Then he heard a tiny gasp followed by an excited but carefully controlled voice. Really? Yes, he replied warmly. I would like to meet the young lady who practiced all night just to make one important phone call. Emma smiled so brightly that it could almost be heard through the phone. I will ask my mom after she comes home from her interview. Nathan noticed the wording immediately. She has an interview today? Yes, Emma answered. She has had many interviews. She always tells me they help her learn, even when she does not get the job. Nathan quietly admired the dignity behind those words. He reached for a notepad lying beside the conference room window and carefully wrote 3 things before the ink could dry in his memory. Sarah Parker. 8 years of service. One more chance. Beneath those words, almost without thinking, he added a 4th line. Listen first. Emma folded her notebook paper with great care before placing it inside the pocket of her sweater. Thank you for answering your phone, she said gently. I thought someone important might be too busy. Nathan looked around the executive floor where dozens of people worked tirelessly to build a successful company. Then he answered with complete sincerity. Emma, today you reminded me what being important is actually supposed to mean. After they said goodbye, Nathan slowly returned to the boardroom. Every executive looked toward him with quiet curiosity. Instead of reopening the presentation, Nathan closed his notebook and looked around the room with calm determination. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, before we discuss where this company is going next, I believe we first need to remember who we are here to serve. The room remained completely silent, because although none of them had heard the little girl's voice, every person could already see that a single conversation had begun changing something much larger than the schedule for one ordinary Monday morning. That afternoon, Nathan Brooks canceled 2 meetings that had been scheduled for weeks without offering anyone an explanation beyond a simple sentence. Some conversations cannot wait. His driver guided the black sedan away from the downtown skyline and into a quiet neighborhood where modest brick apartment buildings stood beneath rows of old maple trees beginning to show fresh spring buds. The address Emma Parker had given him led to a small second-floor apartment with flower pots resting outside the front door. Several of the plants had clearly been cared for with patience despite their worn containers. Nathan noticed that detail before he even knocked. A moment later, the door slowly opened. Emma stood there wearing the same pale blue sweater she had worn during the phone call, her folded sheet of notebook paper still carefully tucked inside its front pocket. Her bright blue eyes widened with surprise before a joyful smile spread across her face. You really came, she whispered. Nathan smiled warmly. I told you I would. Emma stepped aside politely and invited him inside. The apartment was simple, clean, and filled with quiet dignity rather than luxury. Books borrowed from the local library rested neatly on a small shelf. Family photographs covered one wall, showing birthdays, school plays, and happy summers at public parks. A worn dining table sat near the kitchen window, where sunlight warmed a small vase holding fresh daisies. Nothing inside suggested wealth, but everything reflected love and careful attention. Footsteps approached from the hallway. Sarah Parker entered the room carrying a folder containing resumes and interview notes. The moment she recognized Nathan Brooks standing in her living room, she stopped completely. Confusion quickly turned into embarrassment. Mr. Brooks, she said quietly. I do not understand. Emma lowered her head. Mom, I need to tell you something. Sarah looked gently toward her daughter as Emma slowly removed the folded notebook paper from her sweater pocket. I called him yesterday. Sarah's eyes filled with surprise, not anger. You did what? Emma nervously unfolded the wrinkled page. I only wanted someone to know how hard you worked. Sarah knelt beside her daughter and carefully listened while Emma explained every word she had practiced throughout the previous night. She admitted that she searched the company website, asked the receptionist if there was any way to leave a message for the CEO, and nearly hung up several times before finding enough courage to speak. Nathan quietly watched as Sarah wrapped her arms around Emma with gentle gratitude. "You should have told me," Sarah whispered. Emma looked down at the paper again. "I was afraid you would say no because you always tell me not to ask people for special favors." Sarah smiled softly through grateful tears. "Because I wanted you to believe we earn opportunities." Nathan finally spoke. "Emma never asked me for a favor." Both of them looked toward him. "She asked me to see someone I should have noticed long ago." Sarah remained silent while Nathan accepted the worn folder she had been carrying. Inside were carefully organized resumes, interview schedules, recommendation letters, professional certifications, and one old employee identification badge from Brooks Global. The plastic card had become slightly faded over the years, but Sarah had preserved it with remarkable care. Nathan studied the familiar company logo before looking back at her. In that quiet apartment, surrounded by ordinary memories and extraordinary resilience, he realized he was no longer looking at a former employee. He was looking at a woman who had never stopped believing in the values the company itself claimed to represent, even after life had given her every reason to lose hope. After spending nearly an hour inside the Parker family's apartment, Nathan Brooks left carrying far more than Sarah Parker's resume folder. He carried questions that could not be answered by spreadsheets or quarterly reports. On the drive back to headquarters, he opened the folder once more. Every document had been carefully protected inside transparent sleeves. Recommendation letters described Sarah as dependable, thoughtful, and remarkably patient with customers. Annual performance reviews consistently praised her professionalism, attention to detail, and willingness to mentor new employees. One handwritten thank you note from an elderly client simply read, "Thank you for treating me like a person instead of a number." Nathan quietly folded the note back into place. He realized he had never seen these words before because they had never appeared inside executive summaries prepared for leadership meetings. Early the next morning, Nathan arrived at the office before sunrise. Instead of asking his executive assistant to schedule another strategy session, he requested the complete employment history for Sarah Parker. Human Resources delivered the file within the hour. Nothing inside suggested poor performance. There had been no disciplinary actions, no customer complaints, and no concerns about her work ethic. The final page simply stated that her position had been eliminated during a company-wide restructuring designed to improve operational efficiency. Nathan slowly lowered the file onto his desk. Efficiency had reduced a position, but somewhere beyond that decision, an employee had lost confidence, a family had lost stability, and an 8-year-old girl had spent an entire night practicing a phone call she hoped she would never need to make. Later that afternoon, Nathan invited Sarah to headquarters for a professional meeting. She arrived wearing a neatly pressed navy blouse, carrying the same resume folder she had brought to every interview during the previous year. Emma accompanied her after school, quietly sitting in the reception area with a library book resting on her lap and the folded notebook paper safely tucked inside her sweater pocket. Nathan welcomed Sarah into a conference room, not his executive office. He wanted the conversation to feel like an interview based on respect rather than charity. They discussed her previous responsibilities, customer service experience, software skills, professional development, and the changes that had taken place since she last worked for the company. Sarah answered every question with calm honesty. She never blamed the business for losing her position. She simply explained what she had learned during the difficult months that followed and how determined she remained to continue growing. Nathan listened carefully, becoming more impressed with every answer. When the interview concluded, he stood and extended his hand with genuine admiration. "Mrs. Parker," he said warmly, "today you earned exactly what you hoped to earn. An opportunity." Sarah looked at him with quiet surprise. Nathan smiled before continuing. I would like to invite you to return to Brooks Global in a position that reflects both your experience and your dedication. Sarah covered her mouth as grateful tears filled her eyes. Through the conference room window, Emma looked up from her book, unable to hear the conversation but recognizing the smile on her mother's face. It was the same smile she remembered from years earlier, before uncertainty had quietly settled into their home. Emma carefully reached into her sweater pocket and unfolded the wrinkled notebook paper one more time. Looking at the words she had practiced so faithfully, she smiled softly before folding it again. She no longer needed the script because the hope she had written across those pages had finally become real. Sarah Parker's first Monday back at Brooks Global began long before sunrise. She stood quietly in front of the bedroom mirror, fastening the same simple silver necklace she had worn during every important moment of her career. Emma Parker watched from the hallway with a smile too bright to hide. For the first time in many months, she saw her mother preparing for work instead of preparing for another interview. The familiar navy blouse had been carefully pressed the night before, the resume folder now rested inside a desk drawer instead of being carried from one office to another, and the uncertainty that once filled their apartment had slowly been replaced by quiet confidence. Before leaving, Sarah knelt beside Emma and gently brushed a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Thank you for believing in me when I forgot how to believe in myself," she whispered. Emma smiled shyly before reaching into her sweater pocket and touching the folded notebook paper she still carried everywhere. She no longer needed the words written across its pages, yet she could not imagine leaving it behind because it reminded her that courage often begins with one small sentence spoken at the right moment. Later that morning, Nathan Brooks welcomed Sarah personally as she entered the headquarters lobby. Instead of escorting her directly to a workstation, he introduced her to managers, reception staff, security officers, and employees who had known her years before. Many recognized her immediately. Warm smiles spread naturally across the office as former coworkers greeted her with genuine happiness rather than surprise. Several admitted they had often wondered what had happened after the restructuring but had never known how to reach her. Sarah realized she had never truly been forgotten. She had simply disappeared behind the silence that sometimes follows difficult changes. Nathan quietly observed those conversations from a short distance away. Every handshake reminded him that companies were built through relationships long before they were measured by quarterly results. During lunch, Nathan invited department leaders into a small conference room. He placed Sarah's employment file beside the worn thank you note from the elderly customer and then laid Emma's carefully folded notebook paper beside them. The room remained silent as he explained how one child's phone call had led him to examine not only a single personnel decision but the values guiding countless others. "We spend extraordinary amounts of time measuring performance," he said calmly. "Today I want us to spend equal time remembering the people behind every file we review." No one interrupted him. The atmosphere felt different from previous leadership meetings because the discussion centered on humanity rather than numbers. That afternoon, Sarah completed her orientation and returned to serving customers with the same patience that had once earned so many letters of appreciation. She greeted every visitor with sincere kindness, listening carefully before offering help. Watching quietly from across the lobby, Nathan noticed something remarkable. The confidence Emma believed had disappeared had never truly been lost. It had only been waiting for someone to recognize it again. Before leaving work, Nathan stopped by the reception desk where Sarah was organizing documents for the following morning. "How did your first day feel?" he asked. Sarah smiled warmly, her eyes reflecting gratitude rather than relief. "It felt like coming home after taking a road I never planned to travel." Nathan nodded thoughtfully before looking toward the entrance where Emma waited with a library book resting on her lap. The little girl waved enthusiastically as her mother finished for the day. Nathan smiled back, realizing that one carefully prepared phone call had already begun changing far more than a single career. It was quietly teaching an entire company that every application, every interview, and every employment decision represented not only a position to fill but also a family hoping for one more opportunity to believe in tomorrow. Several weeks passed, and the quiet changes inside Brooks Global became impossible to ignore. Employees greeted one another more often in the hallways, managers spent a little longer listening before making decisions, and conversations that once revolved only around deadlines gradually included questions about people, families, and long-term growth. Nathan Brooks watched those changes with quiet satisfaction, but he also understood that lasting improvement required more than one inspiring story. It required new standards that would continue long after the headlines faded. On a bright Thursday morning, he gathered the executive leadership team inside the same boardroom where Emma Parker's phone call had interrupted an ordinary meeting weeks earlier. The large presentation screens displayed no financial forecasts. Instead, a single sentence appeared across the screen. Every decision reaches a family before it reaches a balance sheet. The room remained unusually quiet as Nathan stood beside the conference table. Several executives exchanged thoughtful glances, sensing that this meeting would reshape more than company policy. Nathan carefully placed 3 familiar items on the polished walnut table. Sarah Parker's former employee identification badge rested beside the handwritten thank you note from the elderly customer. Next to both lay Emma's folded notebook paper, its creased edges showing how often it had been opened and carefully folded again. Nathan looked around the room before speaking. These 3 items tell us more about leadership than any report I have reviewed this year. One senior executive respectfully raised a question. Are we changing our hiring standards? Nathan answered without hesitation. No. We are improving the way we recognize people before making decisions about them. He explained that Brooks Global would begin a comprehensive review program called Second Chance Careers. Former employees whose positions had been eliminated during restructuring could voluntarily apply for updated evaluations based on current qualifications, professional growth, and demonstrated experience rather than being permanently defined by one difficult season. Every application would receive an individual review conducted by multiple departments instead of relying entirely on automated filtering systems. The proposal immediately sparked thoughtful discussion. Some leaders expressed concern about additional time and resources. Others wondered whether expectations might become unrealistic. Nathan listened carefully to every opinion before responding with calm confidence. Efficiency will always matter, he said. But efficiency without perspective can quietly overlook extraordinary people. No one argued after that. The room grew reflective as each executive considered decisions made over many years. By the end of the meeting, every department leader agreed to participate in the new initiative. News of the program spread quickly throughout the company. Employees volunteered to mentor returning applicants. Human Resources redesigned interview procedures to include deeper conversations about experience and personal growth, and managers received additional training focused on recognizing character alongside professional qualifications. One afternoon after school, Emma visited headquarters to surprise her mother with homemade oatmeal cookies packed inside a small tin decorated with colorful hand-drawn flowers. As she walked through the lobby, employees who had never spoken with her before smiled warmly and thanked her for visiting. Emma looked around with innocent curiosity before quietly asking Nathan, "Why is everyone so happy today?" Nathan smiled as he accepted one of the cookies. Because one little girl reminded all of us that listening is one of the most important jobs we have. Emma glanced toward her mother helping a customer nearby. Sarah's confident smile had become part of her daily routine once again. Looking around the bright lobby filled with welcoming faces, Emma realized she had never asked for anything extraordinary. She had simply hoped someone would see the goodness that had always been there, waiting patiently for another chance to shine. Nearly a year after one unexpected phone call quietly changed the direction of Brooks Global, the Second Chance Careers program had become far more than a company initiative. It had grown into a promise that every application deserved to be read with both professional judgment and human understanding. Former employees from different departments returned to interview rooms carrying updated resumes, new certifications, fresh experience, and renewed confidence. Some earned positions immediately. Others received mentoring, career guidance, or recommendations that opened doors elsewhere. No one left feeling invisible. Nathan Brooks often walked through the headquarters lobby before the workday officially began. He noticed conversations that never would have happened months earlier. Managers introduced themselves to applicants before interviews. Receptionists greeted every visitor by name whenever possible. Employees volunteered to welcome candidates waiting in the lobby with coffee, water, and genuine conversation instead of leaving them to sit alone in silence. The atmosphere inside the building felt warmer without sacrificing professionalism. Success and kindness no longer competed with one another. They worked side by side. Sarah Parker quickly became one of the most respected mentors in customer relations. New employees naturally sought her advice because she listened before offering solutions. Whenever someone thanked her for the encouragement she provided, she simply smiled and said, "Everyone deserves someone who believes in them before they believe in themselves." Nathan quietly recognized those words. They sounded very similar to the lesson Emma had unknowingly taught him during that unforgettable phone call. One afternoon, Brooks Global welcomed community leaders, local business owners, educators, and non-profit organizations to celebrate the first anniversary of the Second Chance Careers program. The headquarters lobby had been transformed into a welcoming gathering space filled with fresh flowers, family photographs contributed by employees, and display boards sharing stories of people whose careers had been restored through opportunity instead of sympathy. Nathan stood before the audience with calm gratitude. Rather than discussing financial growth or corporate achievements, he spoke about listening, dignity, and the responsibility every leader carries when making decisions that affect families beyond office walls. As his remarks concluded, he invited one special guest onto the stage. Emma Parker walked forward wearing a simple blue dress and carrying the familiar folded notebook paper inside a small transparent protective sleeve. The audience applauded warmly as she smiled with quiet confidence. Nathan carefully accepted the paper before holding it where everyone could see its faded pencil marks and neatly rewritten sentences. "This is not an important document because of what it says," he explained gently. "It is important because an 8-year-old girl believed that honest words could reach someone she had never met." The room became completely silent. Nathan then placed the protected notebook paper inside a handcrafted wooden frame that had been prepared in advance. Beneath it rested a small engraved plaque with a simple message: "Always listen before deciding." The framed paper was displayed permanently inside the company lobby where every employee, applicant, executive, and visitor would pass it each day. Emma looked at the frame for several quiet moments before turning toward her mother, whose proud smile reflected a confidence that had fully returned. Nathan realized the greatest change inside Brooks Global could never be measured by reports or revenue. It lived in ordinary conversations, open doors, second chances, and the courage of one little girl who believed that if she spoke from her heart, someone powerful enough to help might choose to listen instead of looking away. One spring morning, exactly 1 year after Emma Parker gathered the courage to make the most important phone call of her young life, the headquarters of Brooks Global welcomed another ordinary workday that quietly reflected an extraordinary transformation. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, filling the spacious lobby with warmth as employees greeted one another by name before beginning their daily routines. New applicants waited comfortably in the reception area, no longer sitting alone in anxious silence because volunteers from different departments now welcomed every visitor with conversation, encouragement, and respect. The framed notebook paper remained displayed near the entrance beneath its simple engraved message, reminding everyone who walked through the building that every meaningful decision begins by listening. Nathan Brooks paused in front of the frame before entering his office, just as he did every morning. He no longer saw only faded pencil marks or carefully rewritten sentences. He saw the quiet courage of an 8-year-old girl who believed honesty could reach someone she had never met. That belief had become part of the company's identity. Later that afternoon, Sarah Parker completed another successful day helping customers and mentoring newly hired employees. She had become known throughout the company not only for her professionalism but also for the calm confidence she shared with anyone beginning a new chapter in life. As she prepared to leave, several coworkers thanked her for the patience she showed each day. Sarah smiled warmly, remembering how impossible such moments had once seemed. Outside the building, Emma waited on a nearby bench with a library book resting across her knees, happily waving the moment she saw her mother step through the revolving doors. Nathan happened to be leaving at the same time and walked over to greet them. Emma reached into her backpack and carefully removed the original notebook where she had written the script for that unforgettable phone call. Most of the pages were now filled with school assignments, drawings, and new dreams, but the first page remained exactly as she had written it on that quiet Sunday night. Nathan smiled as she handed him the notebook for a moment. "I wanted to keep practicing writing," Emma explained. "Words can help people." Nathan nodded thoughtfully before returning it to her. "Yes," he replied gently. "When they come from an honest heart, they certainly can." Together they stood watching employees leave the building with relaxed smiles, greeting one another like neighbors instead of strangers. Nathan realized that the greatest success Brooks Global had achieved during the past year was not found in financial reports, business awards, or expanding offices. It was found in restored confidence, renewed opportunities, and the understanding that every person carries a story invisible to the eye. Before saying goodbye, Emma looked up at Nathan with the same quiet sincerity that had first captured his attention through a telephone line. "I am glad you answered," she said softly. Nathan smiled with genuine gratitude. "Emma, I am even more grateful that you called." As mother and daughter walked home together beneath rows of blooming maple trees, Nathan remained standing outside the headquarters for another quiet moment, watching them disappear into the warm spring afternoon. He understood that true leadership had never been about speaking the loudest voice in the room. It had always been about hearing the smallest one. And from that day forward, every time the phone on his desk rang, he answered with the same calm reminder that had forever changed his life. Somewhere on the other end of the line might be another voice carrying hope, waiting for someone willing to listen.